Antarctica, a unique region of the world that serves as both a country and a continent at the same time. What was once formerly a prison colony has now turned into a bustling metropolitan country hosting over 23 million occupants, despite still being both the smallest and most isolated regions in the world, second only to Antarctica. A majority of the United States' perceptions toward Australia have largely been instigated by both the media and popular culture. American knowledge of the bush capital usually is limited to opera houses, beautiful reefs filled of course with deadly sharks, alligators, jellyfish, and octopuses, the vast outback also filled with its fair share of deadly snakes, spiders, and crocodiles as well, and of course, this guy who went around finding these animals for the fun of it.
So what I gotta do is whammo!
But with over 8,000 miles of distance separating the United States and Australia, the land down under might seem completely like an alien world to us.
We're not Australia. It's a very different culture. Different people, different everything.
Right, there's no similarity with Australia. Australia is a former British colony with a wild frontier that was tamed by brave men who also wiped out almost an entire indigenous population. And we are not similar to that. Right?
Right.
Right. However, despite its colonial origins, Australia has little similarities with the US, and Asia for that matter, especially when it comes to the media. Australia was allowed freedom of an open press as early as 1825, when it was still under British rule. This led many Australian news outlets to be heavily inspired and modeled after formal English practices. After calling for independence in 1901, Australia chose to keep close ties to its motherland of Great Britain, even continuing to recognize the Queen Elizabeth as their formal monarch, even though Buckingham Palace is over 11,000 miles away. Being a free enterprise economy, Australian media companies have become both highly professional and exceptionally competitive. However, the relationship between Australia and Great Britain led many of these news outlets to direct their time, money, and attention to communicating issues happening in Europe, rather than focusing on neighboring Asia. Australia would keep this image of being an ideological Eurocentric country in an Asian-centric presence for quite some time. In fact, it wasn't until World War II that the Australian media chose to turn its cameras away from what was happening in London to what was happening in its own backyard, particularly due to the fast uprising of neighborly Imperial Japan. Yet, due to its competitive roots, the Australian media saw the conflict happening throughout the Pacific as a perfect opportunity to expand its media outreach and outshine one another in their conflict media coverage. In turn, Australian journalists became well known for their use of parachute journalism, or the act of sending reporters into wartime hotspots to report action live and uncut. This is a practice that a vast majority of Australian news outlets still partake and even take pride in doing to this day. In summation, Australia's media is heavily inspired by its British colonial origins. In its early days, it chose to predominantly focus on Eurocentric stories despite being located in the Asian, South Pacific, and Indian Oceans. The proximity of World War II would change Australian journalists' focus onto surrounding Asia, creating parachute journalism and active reporting by competitive Australian media outlets. Today, with a 99.8% country literacy rate, Australian news suppliers still stay highly competitive. Every day, 48 daily newspapers, 104 television stations, 608 radio stations, and more fight for viewer attention, helping put Australia in the top 25 in this year's most recent Freedom of Press Index.